What kind of person wears another man's necklace to my brother's funeral? I stood in the hushed twilight of the funeral parlor, the air heavy with incense and the murmurs of condolences. My fingers curled into fists at my sides as I stared at the glint of diamonds resting against Vanessa's collarbone. It was a familiar necklace, sickeningly familiar. I knew exactly where it came from, and who had given it to her. The sight of that sparkling chain on this solemn day felt like a slap to my face, a desecration of my brother's memory. My heart pounded with a mix of grief and boiling anger. How dare she? Across the room, Vanessa, my sister-in-law, the widow draped in feigned sorrow, lifted a perfectly manicured hand to dab at non-existent tears. Even in mourning black, she managed to turn heads. Her beauty was the kind that commanded attention. But all I saw was the gaudy pendant resting just above her heart, gleaming coldly under the soft lights. That necklace had been purchased by another man, not her late husband. I had witnessed the transaction with my own eyes, a secret that burned inside me now, begging to be unleashed. My chest tightened as I recalled the painful irony. Here we were honoring James's life, a life defined by compassion and sacrifice, while his wife flaunted a trinket of betrayal openly before his coffin. A rush of hot blood surged to my temples. I could almost hear James's gentle admonition in my head, telling me to stay calm, to not make a scene. But James wasn't here anymore. And the injustice of it all, the disrespect, was too much to swallow. Vanessa must have sensed my glare. Her eyes, red-rimmed but dry, flicked toward me. For a brief moment, our gazes locked. I expected her to look away, perhaps ashamed. Instead, she arched one sculpted eyebrow as if in challenge, her lips curling in a tiny, defiant smirk. That smug, shameless look shattered the last thread of my self-restraint. Before I knew it, I was marching toward her through the sea of black-clad mourners. A distant part of me registered the concerned looks from some of James's colleagues, the rustle of fabric as people parted to let me pass. My pulse roared in my ears. All I could focus on was that cruel smile and the glitter of diamonds bouncing lightly with each of her breaths. "You have some nerve," I hissed under my breath, stopping just a foot away from her. My voice trembled, low enough not to disturb the quiet sobs and soft organ music echoing through the hall, but sharp with barely contained rage. Vanessa tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Hannah, darling, whatever do you mean?" she replied softly, her tone saccharine sweet. Up close, I could see the untouched powder on her cheeks, no streaks of tears. She hadn't cried at all. I swallowed, my throat dry. "That necklace," I managed, flicking my eyes toward the diamonds that winked as bright as her unapologetic gaze. "How could you wear that here?" Vanessa's fingers went to the pendant, touching it almost protectively. There was a flash of recognition in her eyes. She knew I'd recognized it. Yet she only shrugged one shoulder in a graceful, dismissive motion. "It's a lovely piece, isn't it? James would have wanted me to have nice things to remember him by." She pouted then, pushing out a tremulous sigh that didn't fool me for a second. A red haze clouded my vision. Nice things to remember him by? James never gave her that necklace, of that I was certain. The audacity of her twisting this into some sort of tribute made my hands tremble. My brother's coffin lay just yards away, draped in white lilies, and here stood his wife spinning lies, draped in vanity. "How dare you?" I whispered, voice taut. My nails bit into my palms. "Do you even feel a shred of shame, Vanessa? He loved you, My voice choked off as emotion surged up my throat. "He adored you. And this is how you show your grief? By flaunting gifts from another man." At that, Vanessa's mask of politeness slipped. Her eyes flashed with something between anger and scorn. She stepped closer, her designer heels nearly toe-to-toe with my sensible flats. I smelled her expensive perfume, heavy and cloying in the warm, still air. "You're causing a scene," she murmured, her voice still low but seething now. "This is neither the time nor place, dear sister." The way she spat that last word, sister, was as if it were a curse. She leaned in, and I could see the hardness in her expression beneath the facade of widowly composure. "And so what if I am? So what if I wear what I want? James knew who I was when he married me," she said, her breath cool on my cheek. "If he was unhappy about it, that's on him, not me." I stared at her, stunned for a heartbeat by her callousness. The quiet melody of the funeral parlor's piano droned on behind us, oblivious to the civil war breaking out in the corner. My pulse thundered. I thought of James, kind, generous James, lying cold and lifeless in his casket while this woman, who should have been broken with grief, stood here practically gloating. "He was your husband," I snarled, tears of fury and sorrow prickling in my eyes. "He worshipped the ground you walked on, and you—" My voice broke. "You're desecrating his memory." Vanessa rolled her eyes, a gesture so slight I almost thought I imagined it. "Don't be so dramatic, Hannah," she replied, a faint sigh accompanying her words. "You act like I'm dancing on his grave. I'm only wearing a necklace. You're always overreacting." Overreacting. The word ignited something explosive in me. Years of pent-up frustration and resentment toward this woman boiled over. The memory of every snub, every selfish act of hers that James forgave, every tear James never shed but should have, all of it fueled the fire raging inside me. My hand flew before I could think. I swung my open palm toward her perfect, painted face, driven by an anger that had finally broken its chains. But it never landed. A strong hand caught my wrist mid-swing, gripping firmly enough to halt my slap in its tracks. I gasped, half in rage, half in surprise, and tried to jerk free, but the grip was unyielding. Easy, a low male voice whispered near my ear. Not here, not now. I twisted my head to see who had intervened. It was a man in a neat black suit, standing just behind me. His other hand lightly touched my shoulder in reassurance. I didn't recognize him immediately, but the gentle, imploring look in his eyes gave me pause. Around us, a few people had noticed the commotion. Soft gasps, wide eyes, the ripple of whispers spreading through the gathered mourners. Vanessa had recoiled, one hand on her cheek even though I hadn't struck her, her eyes wide in shock. For once, she had nothing to say. She simply glared at the man who stopped me, and then at me, her face twisting through an ugly cycle of emotions. Outrage, fear, and simmering hatred. My arm trembled in the stranger's grasp. I realized what I'd almost done. Struck someone at a funeral, my own brother's funeral. Shame and anger warred within me, leaving me shaking and breathless. The man holding my wrist slowly released it when he saw that I wasn't going to lunge at her again. My palm stung, more from the intent than actual impact. Vanessa recovered her voice, her tone cutting through the stunned silence. Have you lost your mind? She spat at me in a harsh whisper, eyes darting around as if suddenly aware of the audience we'd attracted. Her veneer of grieving widow was crumbling, revealing the fury beneath. Attacking me at my husband's funeral? What is wrong with you? I opened my mouth, maybe to apologize for causing a scene, maybe to unleash everything I'd been holding back for years. I wasn't sure which would come out. But before I could speak, the man at my side stepped forward. He positioned himself subtly between us, his hand still gently hovering near my arm as if ready to restrain me again if needed. In a calm, quiet voice, he addressed Vanessa. Ma'am, this really isn't the place. Let's all take a breath. There was authority in his tone, a firmness that cut through the tension. Only then did I notice the small hospital pin on his lapel and the faint outline of a name badge tucked into his jacket pocket. He wasn't just a random mourner. He worked at the hospital, James's hospital. Vanessa's eyes narrowed on the pin, and something like recognition flickered across her face. Perhaps she recalled his face from the oncology ward or staff corridors, though God knows she seldom bothered to visit James at work. She jutted her chin out, clinging to indignation. Who do you think you are? She snapped, though her voice was quieter now, embarrassment seeping in as more eyes turned our way. The man gave a slight bow of his head. My name is Ken, he said politely. I was one of James's nurses. He glanced at me, then back at her. He was a good man. We all cared about him a lot. Let's not do this today. The words were simple, but I sensed a deeper meaning behind them as his hand subtly tightened on my shoulder, a supportive gesture meant for me alone. For a moment, all Vanessa could do was huff, her chest rising and falling in quick, angry breaths. She flicked her gaze from Ken to me and back, calculating her next move. I could see the tension in her, caught between maintaining her appearance and lashing out. Finally, she gave a sharp, contemptuous sniff and stepped back. Fine, she muttered. I won't dignify this insanity further. My father's voice suddenly echoed from somewhere nearby. Is everything all right? Dad was approaching, concern etched on his face, with my mother close behind him. They must have seen the commotion from across the hall where they'd been receiving guests. Behind them, a few of James's colleagues hovered with uneasy looks, clearly aware that something was amiss. Ken immediately withdrew his hand from me, straightening up. I could feel my face burning with shame now, the adrenaline ebbing and leaving behind a sickly embarrassment. This was not how today was supposed to go. Today was about James, honoring him, saying goodbye, not about this ugly feud that had been festering under the surface. I forced myself to speak, though my voice came out hoarse. I'm sorry, I said, addressing my parents and anyone else who had heard. I just need a moment. I shot one last glare at Vanessa, who had already regained her composure and was smoothing her hair as if nothing had happened, then turned on my heel and hurried toward the exit. As I pushed open the heavy door of the parlor and stepped out into the cool evening air, I realized my hands were shaking violently. I pressed them against my black dress, trying to steady myself. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple as the sun set behind the city skyline, a beautiful sight so starkly at odds with the turmoil inside me. I drew in a deep, shuddering breath. Through the cracked door behind me, I could still hear the muffled sounds of the service continuing, someone else speaking a eulogy, a soft sob or two. I closed my eyes tight. In my mind, I saw James's warm smile, the way his eyes crinkled in the corners when he left. A fresh wave of grief crashed over me, and a sob finally tore free of my chest. I sank onto a bench just outside the entrance, buried my face in my hands, and let the tears come. Hot, bitter tears of loss, of anger, of frustration. How did we end up here, James? I wondered silently, my shoulders trembling. How did it all come to this? It hadn't always been this way. Just a few months ago, I was happy. We were happy, a family intact. I never imagined that by the time autumn arrived, I'd be sitting outside my only brother's funeral, shaking with rage toward the woman he loved. That summer feels like a lifetime ago now. I remember the bright morning sun streaming through my kitchen window as I nervously straightened the pleats of my favorite dress. I was 31 and had always been content with my independent life, managing a small but charming jewelry boutique in the city. Marriage was never something I chased or needed to feel fulfilled. Love, to me, meant more than any financial security a union could bring. Perhaps that's why, when my boyfriend Ethan proposed, I said yes with my heart rather than my head, fully aware that neither of us was wealthy in anything but affection. I believed marriage should be about love, not money. Little did I know how that belief was about to be tested. That day, our families were set to meet and celebrate our engagement. It was meant to be an intimate gathering at my parents' home, a chance for Ethan's parents and mine to get to know each other, and for my loved ones to congratulate us. I was excited and anxious. Ethan had already won my heart. Now I hoped he would win over my family too, especially my protective older brother James. James had been both a brother and a mentor to me. 8 years my senior, he often joked that he'd practically helped raise me alongside our parents. Despite his teasing about vetting any potential suitors as if he were my father, I knew he only wanted me to be happy. He was a brilliant surgeon, respected and constantly busy, but always made time to check in on me. The thought of him grilling poor Ethan in a mock interrogation made me smile as I got ready. My phone buzzed on the dresser, jolting me from my thoughts. I picked it up to see a text from my sister-in-law Vanessa. Sorry, we'll make it TMRW. Something came up. Enjoy. That was it. A one-line dismissal. I frowned, reading it twice. Something came up? I knew that tone too well. Vague and unapologetic. Vanessa had decided our engagement gathering was not worth her time. I sighed, irritation flaring. It wasn't the first time she'd skipped a family event for some frivolous reason, but ditching this particular occasion felt like a new low. My thumb hovered over the call button. I wanted to ring her up and demand an explanation. Instead, I took a calming breath and dialed James. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm but a touch wary. Hey Hannah. Everything okay? Hi, I began trying to keep my tone neutral. I just got a message from Vanessa. She's not coming tomorrow. Did she mention anything to you? James was quiet for a second. She said she had an appointment she couldn't miss, he replied carefully. I closed my eyes. Appointment. Right. James, I said, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice. It's the engagement celebration for your little sister, and she can't miss a spa day or shopping trip or whatever it is. He sighed heavily. I'm sorry. I know it's important. She told me she promised a friend she'd join her for afternoon tea at the Grand Imperial Hotel. Some exclusive thing that was apparently hard to book. I couldn't help the incredulous laugh that escaped. Afternoon tea? At a hotel? And that's more important than our families getting together. Hannah, please, he murmured. I know how it looks. I'm not happy about it either. I tried to convince her to reschedule, but you know how she is once her mind's set. I did know. Oh, I knew all too well. Vanessa was stunningly beautiful and equally stubborn. Once she decided her priorities, nothing else mattered. Not even common courtesy. We'd all spent years tiptoeing around her whims, forgiving her absences at holidays, excusing her last-minute cancellations. Initially, we chalked it up to her being an only child from a wealthy family, or the pressures of maintaining the polished image she'd cultivated since her modeling days. But each new incident chipped away at our patience. I'm tired of it, James, I confessed, voice low and tense. I moved to the window and stared out at the quiet street below, trying to rein in my temper. She does whatever she wants and expects the world to accommodate her. This was important to me. My voice caught, surprising me with the depth of hurt I felt. To us. It was important to us. On the other end of the line, I heard my brother exhale, a soft crackle of static accompanying his breath. I know. You have every right to be upset. Then why do you keep letting her off the hook? I replied, a bit more sharply than I intended. Every time she pulls something like this, you apologize on her behalf. You run around covering for her, making excuses. It's like she has no responsibility, and you're left cleaning up the mess. There was a pause, and when James spoke again, his voice was gentle, placating. Listen, I'll be there tomorrow, okay? I wouldn't miss it for the world. And I'll talk to her again. I promise. Maybe she'll come to her senses and drop by after all. I doubted it, but I didn't want to argue further on the eve of my engagement celebration. Alright, I muttered. Thanks, James. Try not to let it ruin your night, he added kindly. It's your special day. Focus on you and Ethan. Don't worry about Vanessa. I'll handle it. I wanted to insist that he shouldn't always have to handle it, that she was his wife and should act like a decent human being without needing intervention. But I bit my tongue. We ended the call, and I tossed the phone onto the bed, frustration still simmering. So, as expected, when the next day came, Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. I remember the late morning sun was brilliant as ever when I arrived at my parents' house, balancing a platter of cupcakes I'd picked up from my favorite bakery for the occasion. My mother was already fussing over the dining table layout, and my father was out on the patio chatting with Ethan's dad about the summer heat. The moment I stepped inside, Mom rushed over, taking the cupcakes from me with one hand and squeezing my arm with the other. You look lovely, dear, she beamed, her eyes crinkling with pride. My parents adored Ethan. They'd met him a few times before and were thrilled about our engagement. Still, this was the first formal meeting between our families, and everyone was a bit on edge, playing the roles of gracious hosts and guests. Everyone except James, who breezed in shortly after me, still wearing his light blue hospital scrubs under a hastily thrown-on blazer. Sorry I'm late, he apologized, though he wasn't really late at all. He carried a bottle of champagne and a wrapped box, which later turned out to hold a beautiful pearl necklace as an engagement gift for me. He gave me a one-armed hug, careful not to crush the cupcakes between us. There's the lady of the hour. How's the future bride feeling? Nervous, I admitted with a grin, but happy you're here. His eyes scanned the room, an unmistakable flicker of disappointment crossing them as he confirmed that the seat next to him, the one we'd set out for his wife, was indeed empty. He forced a smile for me. Wouldn't miss this for anything. He squeezed my shoulder, then stepped forward to greet Ethan and his parents warmly. If any of them found it odd that James's wife was absent, they were too polite to mention it. Despite the initial hiccup, the gathering itself went as well as I could have hoped. My father said a short, heartfelt toast, welcoming Ethan's family into ours. Ethan's mother presented me with a small heirloom locket that had been passed down in their family. I clasped it around my neck, touched by the gesture. Over lunch, conversation flowed easily. My mother and Ethan's exchanging recipes, our fathers debating the best fishing spots for an upcoming summer trip, and James good-naturedly interrogating Ethan about his job and hobbies. At one point, as dessert was being served, James leaned over to me and whispered, "He's a good one, hon." I approve. I laughed softly, relief and joy blooming in my chest. My brother's approval might have been delivered in a teasing tone, but I didn't miss the genuine emotion behind it. It meant the world to me. For a few precious hours, everything felt warm and hopeful. My future seemed bright. I was surrounded by people I loved, celebrating a new chapter of my life. Ethan and I exchanged excited glances across the table, silently marveling that our families meshed so well. Even though I noted Vanessa's absence in the back of my mind, I refused to let it cast a shadow. She was the only blot in an otherwise wonderful day. By late afternoon, the gathering was winding down. Ethan's parents had a long drive home, and my father insisted they take some leftovers and a bottle of wine for the road. There were hugs and invitations to visit again soon, and at last, only our immediate family remained in the living room. My parents, James, Ethan, and me. The sun was dipping low, golden light spilling through the curtains. On the coffee table, the remaining cupcakes sat half-eaten and the champagne glasses were nearly empty. James loosened his tie, he'd changed out of scrubs into a crisp shirt and tie during a quick break he took mid-party, and leaned back on the sofa, looking more exhausted than he should for the hour. I noticed faint dark circles under his eyes that even his easy smiles couldn't hide. My brother worked punishing hours at the hospital, often through nights and weekends. He loved his job, but I worried about the toll it took. My mom, perhaps noticing the same thing, urged, "James, honey, you should take a few slices of cake home. And some food for you and Vanessa for dinner." I made plenty. At the mention of his wife's name, James's expression tightened subtly. He gave a polite smile. "Thanks, Mom. I'll take some for later." We chatted a bit about trivial things. Ethan's parents' upcoming anniversary party, a new restaurant in town, careful to avoid any mention of the one person not present. But finally, as James stood to leave, I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. "When you get a chance, could you ask Vanessa if she enjoyed her afternoon tea?" I said, unable to keep the bite out of my words. James paused, one hand on his car keys, and gave me a warning look. "Hannah." I raised my hands in mock surrender, not wanting to start an argument with my parents watching worriedly. "I'm just curious," I said lightly, though my annoyance was evident. "We missed her today." He sighed and nodded once. "I'll let her know," he said softly. "And I really am sorry she wasn't here. I know it meant a lot to you." I mustered a small smile. "It's all right. Thanks for coming, and for the gift," I added, touching the delicate strand of pearls he'd given me earlier. A flicker of guilt passed through his eyes, as if he wanted to say more, apologize again, perhaps, but instead he simply embraced me. "I'll see you soon, okay? We'll do something fun to celebrate properly. My treat." "Sure," I replied, giving him a squeeze. "Love you, James." "Love you too, sis." As I watched him walk out to his car, I remember a strange, fleeting thought passing through my mind. He looked so tired. I had seen my brother weary from long shifts, but there was something different about the way he moved, a heaviness in his shoulders. I shook it off, attributing it to stress. If only I had known. That evening, after Ethan headed home and my parents were asleep, I was lounging on my couch trying to unwind from the day's excitement. That's when the phone rang. I glanced at the clock, nearly 9 p.m. A sinking feeling hit my stomach when I saw the caller ID. Vanessa. What on earth could she want now? Bracing myself, I answered. "Hello." Immediately, I had to pull the phone away as a shrill voice crackled through the speaker. "How could you do this to me, Hannah?" I frowned, bewildered. "Vanessa? What are you?" She didn't let me finish. Her voice was high and jagged with anger. "I have been waiting all day. You knew I couldn't make it to the engagement lunch, and yet you completely ignored my request." "What request?" I stammered, utterly at a loss. I shifted the phone to my other ear, trying to keep calm. "Vanessa, I don't know what you're talking about. Is something wrong?" "Don't play dumb with me," she screeched, and I had to wince at the pitch of it. "The scones, Hannah. The macarons. I told you I was going to the Grand Imperial Hotel for tea. The least you could have done, after I graciously bowed out of your little family gathering, was swing by and pick up a box of their famous scones and macarons for me. I assumed you'd have the decency to bring some over, or at least leave them at my door as a courtesy. But no, nothing. You completely neglected me." For a moment, I was so stunned I couldn't speak. She was angry, because I hadn't fetched pastries for her from the fancy hotel tea service she ditched us for. The absurdity left me momentarily breathless. Vanessa? I began slowly, struggling to keep my voice level. You chose not to come today. You decided having tea at a hotel was more important. How was I supposed to know you expected me to bring you scones from there? You never asked me to do that. I shouldn't have to ask, she snapped. Any considerate person would have thought of it. I missed the gathering because of that appointment, and you know I love their pastries. A thoughtful sister would have made sure I didn't miss out entirely. But clearly, you don't care about anyone but yourself. I gripped the phone tightly, heat rising in my cheeks. Unbelievable. I'm sorry, what? You ditched my engagement party, and now you're saying I'm the one who doesn't care about others. She barreled on as if she hadn't heard me, her voice climbing. It was humiliating, you know. I had to leave the hotel empty-handed because someone couldn't be bothered to help. How do you think that makes me look? You made me break a promise to a friend. I was now thoroughly lost. What promise? Vanessa, listen to yourself. My friend and I had planned to each take some of their signature macarons home for our husbands, she snapped, angry tears suddenly lacing her voice. She bought hers, but I didn't because I assumed you were handling it for me since I was busy. Then I come home and have nothing to show. Tyler asked how the tea went and I was so embarrassed. She was crying now, angry, frustrated tears. Or at least pretending to. Her tone oscillated between fury and a kind of wounded indignation that might have been genuine. It hit me then. She really believed what she was saying. In her mind, I had wronged her. I took a deep breath, pressing my fingertips to my temple where a headache was blooming. Vanessa, I said as gently as I could manage, I'm sorry you're upset. But I truly didn't know you wanted me to do that. You never mentioned it, not in your text or to James. If you had asked, I would have tried to help or asked someone to pick them up. But I was busy today with the party and... She cut me off with a derisive laugh. Of course. Busy with your party. Everything's always about you, isn't it, Hannah? My jaw dropped. Any sympathy I might have felt evaporated. That's not fair. Yesterday I practically begged you to come. You chose not to. No one told you to go to that hotel. That was your decision. And now you're mad at me for not reading your mind? For not serving as your errand girl. Her breathing was ragged on the other end. She had the audacity to sound offended. Errand girl? So that's what you think of me? That I treat you like some servant? I bit back the retort that yes, that's exactly how she treated everyone, including her husband. Instead, I tried one more time to inject reason. Vanessa, let's calm down. I'm sorry you didn't get your scones and macarons. But this feels like a misunderstanding. How about this? I can go to the Grand Imperial tomorrow and buy some for you, alright? I'll mail them to your place if you're not in town. I was grasping at anything to quell her rage. It wasn't that I actually felt I owed her pastries, but I hoped a peace offering might end the tirade. But Vanessa was far from pacified. Tomorrow's no good, they won't be fresh, she snapped. And don't bother. The moment's ruined. Just forget it. She let out a shaky sigh that crackled through the phone. This is exactly what I get for expecting a little consideration from you. You and your whole family have been against me from the start. My mouth fell open. That's not true. Oh please, she snarled. Your mother can hardly stand me, your father barely speaks to me unless he has to, and you, Miss Perfect Little Sister, you've never accepted me. Always looking down on me because I enjoy the finer things in life. Just admit it, Hannah. You've resented me marrying your brother from day one. I felt a sting at her words, a mix of guilt and anger. It wasn't as simple as resentment. True, I'd harbored reservations about her vanity, her selfish streak, but I had honestly tried to welcome her, especially in the beginning. We all did. It was her own actions that built that wall between us, not some petty prejudice on our part. I started, but she was relentless. If James knew how you were speaking to me, she threatened, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Suddenly, a surge of protectiveness flared in me. What? What would you do? Tell him I refused to fetch you desserts. That I invited you to celebrate with us and you blew us off? Go ahead, Vanessa. Tell him. I'm done tiptoeing around you. There was a brief silence on the line. Then she let out a cold little laugh. You think he'd take your side? How cute. James knows you can be difficult when you don't get your way. Honestly, you're acting like a spoiled brat right now. I almost wanted to laugh at the sheer irony of that statement, but all I felt was a deep, throbbing exhaustion. This was pointless. Round and round we went, with no resolution in sight. Arguing with Vanessa was like screaming into the wind, useless and draining. Believe what you want, I said quietly, my voice flat now. I'm tired, Vanessa. I had a long day. I'm sorry you're upset, but I'm not doing this anymore tonight. Her tone sharpened. Don't you hang up on me. We're not finished. Yes, we are. I pulled the phone from my ear as she continued to shriek something indiscernible and hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. My hands were trembling as I set the phone down on the coffee table. I felt wrung out, like all the joy of the day had been leached away by that toxic conversation. A single tear slid down my cheek before I angrily wiped it away. I would not let her reduce me to this, a mess of nerves and hurt on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. But as much as I tried to steel myself, questions swirled in my mind. What on earth did my brother see in that woman? How did he put up with these tantrums, this self-absorption, day after day? Did he even see this side of her, or did she reserve it specially for the rest of us? I recalled the early days of their relationship, when James first introduced Vanessa to us. She had been charming then, in a superficial sort of way, polite smiles, lavish compliments about our home, little gifts for my mother. She was breathtakingly beautiful, and I'd been almost enamored with her myself at first, excited to have a glamorous sister-in-law. Perhaps we all gave her too much slack because of that initial dazzle. Perhaps James did too. I thought about something my father once muttered after Vanessa flitted out early from a family dinner: pretty is as pretty does. At the time, I rolled my eyes, thinking he was just being old-fashioned. Now the phrase took on a sharper meaning. Vanessa's beauty might turn heads, but her behavior was steadily erasing any goodwill that beauty once earned her. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the phone call, growing angrier each time I thought of a new retort I could have said. It wasn't until the early hours of dawn, as I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, that a different feeling crept in: concern. Concern for my brother. If this was how Vanessa acted with me, how was she treating him behind closed doors? James rarely spoke about his marriage beyond surface anecdotes. Did he truly see nothing amiss, or was he quietly bearing the brunt of her moods, apologizing for her to himself the way he did to us? As the first light of day filtered through my curtains, I made a decision. I would talk to James. Gently, carefully, but I needed to voice my worries about Vanessa's behavior. Not to badmouth her, just to check on my brother's well-being. He deserved a partner who supported him, especially considering how demanding his career was. And if something was truly wrong in their marriage, maybe I could help or at least encourage him to address it. I didn't know it yet, but fate was already charting a different course for all of us. The next afternoon, I found myself at work, trying to keep my mind focused on customers and inventory, but struggling. The bell over the door of my jewelry store tinkled as an elderly couple left, happily carrying their anniversary purchase in a velvet pouch. I managed a smile and a wave as they departed, then allowed my face to fall the moment I was alone again. It was a slow day midday lull. Usually I'd use such a time to tidy the displays or update inventory logs, but instead I was leaning against the glass counter, staring blankly at a tray of engagement rings and brooding over my brother's situation. I hadn't yet called him. Part of me felt guilty even considering interfering in his marriage. James had always supported my choices. I owed him the same respect. But after last night's meltdown, I was genuinely worried about him, about how much of Vanessa's toxicity he was quietly absorbing day after day. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't notice when the door chime rang again. Wiping the frown off my face, I straightened and prepared to greet the new customer. "Welcome to Crescent Jewelers." I began using my shop's standard greeting, but the words died in my throat as I recognized the pair that had just strolled in. Vanessa. On her arm was a tall, lean man around her age, late 20s or early 30s. They were laughing softly together, and she was angled toward him in that familiar flirtatious way I'd seen countless times during her courtship with my brother. She hadn't spotted me yet. Her attention was on the glittering array of necklaces in the nearest display case. My heart thumped painfully. For a second, I considered ducking behind the counter and pretending I hadn't seen them. But it was too late. A moment later, Vanessa's gaze flickered up and met mine. To my astonishment, she didn't so much as blink in surprise. Instead, a slow, cool smile spread on her glossy red lips. "Well, hello there, Hannah," she drawled, as if our call the night before had never happened, as if she hadn't shrieked at me and accused me of all sorts of selfishness. The man beside her glanced between us, a polite but curious expression on his face. He was handsome in a polished way, hair neatly styled, dressed in an expensive-looking suit without a tie, stylish, urbane. Something about the cut of it suggested European brands. I felt an uneasy pang as he slipped his arm casually from Vanessa's and rested a hand at the small of her back. The familiarity of the gesture, my throat tightened. I stepped out from behind the counter, forcing professionalism into my voice. "Good afternoon," I said evenly. "Welcome." Vanessa chuckled and waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, cut the formalities. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by." Her eyes glinted with something. Mischief? Malice? I couldn't quite tell. "This is an old friend of mine, Roger. We were models together back in the day." Roger offered his hand to me. I shook it stiffly. His grip was firm, confident. "Nice to meet you." "Hannah, is it?" he asked pleasantly. "Yes." I managed a tight smile. "I'm James's sister." "Ah." His eyebrows lifted slightly. If he felt awkward about accompanying a married woman to her in-laws' store, he didn't show it. "James is a great guy. I've had the pleasure of meeting him a few times at events." "Really?" I kept my tone non-committal, though inside my mind raced. Did my brother know this man was parading around town with his wife? "Well, any friend of Vanessa's is welcome here." "Of course," Vanessa said breezily. She began to stroll along the display cases, her stiletto heels clacking on the polished wood floor. "And since I'm here, I might as well take a look. I was telling Roger about the beautiful pieces you carry." I doubted that. If anything, she was here to flaunt and unsettle me. However, I was bound by professionalism and a touch of morbid curiosity, so I followed them. "Looking for anything in particular?" I asked. She winked at Roger. "We're just browsing, but I've been itching for something new. Maybe a bracelet or necklace." Her eyes roamed over the glittering jewelry. "Roger owes me a birthday present, after all." He laughed. "Oh, you? You make it sound like a burden." He slid an arm around her waist. "It's my pleasure." I felt a sick swirl in my stomach. It was one thing to suspect Vanessa was unfaithful, It was another to see it flaunted so blatantly. But here she was, openly cozying up with this man in front of me, a day after skipping my engagement party and screaming at me over pastries. I had to tread carefully. One wrong word and she'd accuse me of meddling again, or worse, twist it into me causing a scene in the store. So I kept my tone neutral as I asked, "How's James?" "I haven't heard from him today." It was a pointed question, and by the flicker in her eyes I knew she caught my meaning. "Does he know you're here?" She did not falter. Opening a case, she pointed at a delicate gold bracelet inlaid with pink sapphires. "That one's pretty. Could I try it on?" Only after I retrieved the piece and handed it to her did she finally address my question. "James is James. Probably married to his job as usual. I barely saw him this morning." Her flippant tone made my chest ache for my brother. I wondered if she had even spoken to him after her tantrum last night, or if she was giving him some silent treatment over the macaron incident. The thought of him coming home from saving lives all day to face either her wrath or her indifference was almost too much to bear. I forced a polite smile as she slipped the bracelet on. "Well, he works hard. We all know that." Roger piped up, seemingly oblivious or indifferent to the tension under our words. "He sure does. One of the top surgeons in the country, right? Must be rewarding, but stressful." He gave a small chuckle. "You know, Vanessa here was telling me I work too hard myself. That's why I insisted on treating her today, to thank her for reminding me to enjoy life a little." He flashed her a charming grin, and she responded by leaning into him, resting a manicured hand on his chest for a moment. I nearly snapped the lid of the display case in anger, but kept my composure. "Is that so?" I murmured, as evenly as I could manage. To Vanessa I added, "The bracelet suits you." She examined it under the light, tilting her wrist back and forth. "Yes, it's lovely. But, you know," she said with a little pout, "I was actually hoping to see if you had any new necklaces in. Maybe something with diamonds." Her gaze flickered to me briefly at the word, diamonds. I immediately thought of the diamond necklace around her neck at the funeral months later, the one I saw her buy with another man's money right here. Was she already eyeing that piece? My heart sank. I had to be careful. If I sold her something today, was I indirectly aiding this affair? The thought made me feel complicit in hurting my brother. Still, a customer is a customer, even if it's your treacherous sister-in-law. I swallowed my personal feelings and led them to a case with higher-end pieces. Inside, a collection of necklaces sparkled. Solitaires, intricate drop pendants, multi-stone arrangements. I had a sinking feeling which one would catch her eye. Sure enough, Vanessa's gaze honed in on an elegant necklace set with a cluster of diamonds that formed a lotus flower shape, a showstopper piece that had arrived last month. Pricey, even after my employee discount. She pointed at it, eyes alight. "That one. It's exquisite. It's 18K white gold with half a carat of diamonds," I informed them, taking it out carefully. "One of our finest new items." Roger let out a low whistle as I draped the necklace against Vanessa's collar for her to see in the mirror. "Gorgeous," he murmured, clearly meaning both the necklace and the woman wearing it. "I think we found the winner." Vanessa tilted her head, admiring herself. "I do love how it looks. And the diamonds are so clear." She glanced at me. "Family discount, I assume?" There it was. I felt my teeth set on edge. In a controlled voice, I replied, "I'm afraid I can't, Vanessa. Store policy. We don't do discounts on luxury pieces, even for family." Her face fell in a dramatic little moue. "Oh, Hannah, surely you can bend the rules just once? What's the harm?" I slid the necklace off her and placed it back in its box with measured movements. "It's not up to me. The inventory system logs everything. I'd get in trouble if a high-ticket item was sold under price without authorization." That was mostly true. I could technically apply a small discretionary discount if I wanted, but I was absolutely not going to for this. Over my dead body, would I help that man buy my sister-in-law a diamond necklace as a token of their illicit relationship? Vanessa sighed theatrically and shrugged at Roger. "Sorry, darling. I tried." He waved it off, reaching for the box. "No worries at all. You deserve the best." He turned to me with an easy smile and pulled out his sleek leather wallet. "We'll take it. Full price is fine." I forced another tight smile and proceeded to ring up the sale. As I handled the transaction, bagging the necklace in our signature blue velvet box and glossy bag, I couldn't resist a glance at Vanessa. She was standing a little apart now, scrolling on her phone, looking utterly unconcerned. Did she really not care that I had caught her like this? Or was this a power play, her showing me that she could do whatever she pleased and I wouldn't dare blow up her spot? My stomach churned. I realized, with a cold sort of clarity, that she likely assumed I wouldn't tell James. Because telling him would break his heart and potentially blow apart our family, and she knew I wouldn't want that. It was a silent pact of mutually assured destruction. She counted on my love for my brother to keep me silent, just as I counted on her discretion not to flaunt her dalliances so openly. Yet here she was, pushing that boundary, testing me. I handed Roger the receipt to sign. As he scribbled his name, I cleared my throat. "Thank you for your purchase. If you need any aftercare or adjustments, please feel free to come back. We offer free cleanings." "You're a star." "Appreciate it," he said, handing back the signed slip. I passed the bag to Vanessa. She accepted it with a bright, girlish smile, hugging his arm. "You spoil me," she cooed to him, then glanced at me. "Thanks, Hannah. I'm sure we'll be back soon. Maybe for matching earrings." She winked. I felt a flush creep up my neck. Have a good day, I managed, biting down on anything else I wanted to say. The bell chimed as they left, arm in arm, their laughter floating back into the shop for a moment before the door closed behind them. The moment they were gone, I sagged against the counter, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My reflection in the display glass showed a woman with red spots high on her cheeks and anger smoldering in her eyes. I hardly recognized myself. My thoughts were a jumble. Should I call James right now? Tell him exactly what I saw? But he was at work, likely in the middle of a surgery or consult. And how would I even begin that conversation? I imagined it. Hey big bro, your wife just waltzed into my store with a strange guy who bought her an expensive necklace. Pretty sure she's cheating on you. Just thinking of saying those words made me feel ill. It would crush him. He adored her, despite everything, despite all her flaws. Or at least he was deeply invested in their marriage. I had never seen him so much as raise his voice at her. Any troubles they had, he kept private. No, I couldn't drop this on him over the phone on a random afternoon. But I also couldn't stay silent indefinitely. He deserved to know the truth, or at least my suspicions. My hands were still trembling with adrenaline and outrage. I decided to step out for some fresh air. I flipped the sign on the door to closed for lunch and stepped outside onto the busy sidewalk. The city hummed around me. Cars, pedestrians, life going on oblivious to the little drama that had just played out. Leaning against the brick wall of the shop, I took out my phone. My thumb hovered over James's contact. Finally, I typed out a message. Hey, you free to talk later? Something I need to discuss with you. Let me know when you're off work. I hesitated a second, then hit send. The rest of the day crawled by. I couldn't concentrate on anything. At one point, a regular customer came in to pick up a custom ring, and I nearly handed her the wrong piece. I managed to laugh it off as being tired, but by the time I closed up for the evening, I felt completely drained. There was still no reply from James, which wasn't unusual given his schedule. Instead of waiting for him to call me, I decided to be proactive and try reaching him that night. After dinner, I retreated to my bedroom and dialed his number, heart thumping. He answered after a few rings, his voice subdued. Hey hon. He sounded exhausted. More than exhausted, defeated, almost. It immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. James? Is everything alright? You sound tired. A hollow laugh. That obvious, huh? Sorry. Long day. I bit my lip, debating how to proceed. Gently, I said, I wanted to check on you. And I had something on my mind. He didn't respond right away. I thought I heard the faint echo of a TV in the background on his end. Maybe the news. Finally, he spoke, carefully neutral. What's up? I took a deep breath. I saw Vanessa today. A puzz. Oh. She stopped by my store. I was suddenly incredibly nervous. Why was this so hard? Maybe because part of me still clung to the hope that there was an innocent explanation. But after her behavior, I couldn't imagine one. How nice of her, he said, a strange edge to his voice that I couldn't quite read. Was it sarcasm? Bitterness? It wasn't exactly a friendly visit, I continued, trying to keep my tone light. She was with someone. A man. Silence on the line. I hurried on. She introduced him as a friend from her modeling days. Maybe you know him? Roger. Another heavy pause. No, he said quietly. I don't. He bought her a necklace, James. I blurted, my composure cracking. There was no point beating around the bush. A very expensive one. And they looked close. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. When my brother finally replied, his voice was calm. Too calm. I see. I didn't expect that response. No denial, no shock. Just an acceptance, as if he'd been expecting something like this. It threw me off. I'm sorry, I said weakly. I didn't want to upset you, but I thought you should know. I'm worried about you. About your relationship. James inhaled slowly, then let it out. Thank you for telling me, Hannah. My heart sank at his tone. It was resigned. World-weary. He didn't sound angry, or even surprised. Just sad. The kind of deep, quiet sadness that's far more alarming than rage. James, have you been feeling all right? I asked softly, shifting gears. You've seemed. I don't know, a little off lately. Are you sleeping enough? He gave a faint chuckle. You sound like Mom. Well, someone has to. I tried to tease, but my concern bled through. Seriously. I'm worried about you. Work is crazy, Vanessa is. Well, you have a lot on your plate. For a moment, I thought he might open up. He started to say something, then stopped. I waited. When he spoke again, he changed the subject slightly. How's the wedding planning going? I blinked at the sudden shift. Oh, well, with everything going on, I haven't done much yet. We're still thinking next spring or summer. Nothing set in stone. We have time. He sounded distracted. I was going to send you some venue ideas. And I'd love for you to walk me down the aisle. You know, like give me away with Dad. I don't know why I said that then. Perhaps trying to spark his enthusiasm, to remind him he'd be there for that moment. There was a soft sound on his end, like he might have caught a breath or a muffled cough. Next year, yes, he murmured. I'm saving up to throw you a great wedding, you know. My little sister deserves the best. Emotion thickened my throat. James, you don't have to. I want to, he insisted. I've actually been putting aside a fund for you. A wedding gift, I guess you could call it. So money will be the last thing you need to worry about for the ceremony. I was floored. That's incredibly generous, but you really don't have to do that. The necklace you gave me was already too much. He cut me off, voice gentle but firm. You're my only sister. Let me do this, okay? Tears pricked my eyes. Okay, I whispered. Thank you. There was a long silence. I sensed he was working up to something by the way his breathing changed, becoming more deliberate. Listen, about what you told me, he finally said. About Vanessa. I held my breath. I appreciate it. I've had a feeling, but hearing it from you, well, it makes it real. His voice wavered just a touch on the word real. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, wishing I could reach through and hug him. I'm so sorry, James. Don't be. I'm a big boy, he attempted to joke, but it fell flat. After another pause, he cleared his throat. Actually, I was going to call you tomorrow. There's something I need to talk to you and Mom and Dad about. Can you come to the house the day after tomorrow? In the morning, around 10. Our parents' house was a couple hours outside the city, the house we grew up in. The sudden request took me by surprise. All of us? Is everything okay? I'll explain when you're here, he said, dodging the question. It's important. And I need you there. Please. The plea in his voice unsettled me more than anything else. James rarely asked for help. He was usually the one offering it. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Was he going to confront Vanessa about the affair? Was he leaving her? Whatever it was, he clearly didn't want to discuss it over the phone. Of course, I said it once. I'll be there. He released a breath that sounded like relief. Thank you. I'll send an email with details. We hung up soon after, and I was left holding a silent phone, mind buzzing. I felt uneasy, like I was standing on the precipice of something big and dark. In all our lives, James had never called a family meeting for something important. The last time we'd all gathered for urgent news, it was when Grandpa died. My stomach twisted. Ethan noticed my troubled look when I emerged from the bedroom. I shared a bit of what happened, leaving out the affair for now, and he immediately offered to drive me to my parents that week and to postpone some of our own plans. I was grateful for his support. He held me that night as I tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that an even greater storm was about to hit. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in my parents' living room, the morning sun streaming through the windows and illuminating motes of dust in the air. There was a heaviness among us that belied the bright summer day outside. My parents sat together on the love seat, my mother's hands clasped tightly around a tissue, my father's expression stern and concerned beneath his silver mustache. I occupied one end of the sofa, twisting my ringed fingers in my lap. Ethan had offered to join for moral support, but I told him it was okay. This felt like a private family matter, and I didn't even know what it was yet. On the other end of the sofa sat my brother. When I first walked in, I had to mask my shock at his appearance. In just a few short days since I'd last seen him, he seemed to have aged years. His normally tan complexion was sallow, almost grayish, and he'd lost weight, his cheekbones more pronounced, the suit he wore hanging a bit looser. But it was his eyes that alarmed me most. They were dull, rimmed with dark circles, and carried a pain I'd never seen before. He gave me a tired smile when I arrived and squeezed my hand. Thanks for coming. Of course, I whispered, trying to ignore the dread creeping up my spine. I noticed immediately that Vanessa was absent. In fact, aside from one of my mom's cats slinking around our ankles, the only people present were the four of us. My mother had clearly been crying beforehand. Her eyes were puffy and red as she kept casting worried glances at her son. Dad looked stoic, but I saw how his hand rested protectively on Mom's knee. We had exchanged a bit of small talk. Well, more like I had gingerly asked James how he was feeling and he deflected, asking about my drive over. After a few minutes of this awkward preamble, it was my father who finally broke the silence. Son, he said gruffly, maybe it's time, before your mother loses her mind with worry. Mom swatted at Dad's arm lightly, but she was looking at James, her brow creased with anxiety. James, honey, please. Just tell your sister what you told us. My heart thundered. I perched on the edge of the sofa, bracing myself. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and ran a hand through his hair. That's when I noticed at his temples a few strands of silver that I could have sworn hadn't been there the week before. He was truly exhausted or ill or both. He took a moment, as if gathering strength, then met my eyes. First, I want to apologize for keeping you in the dark, Hannah. I didn't want to burden you, especially with your engagement and everything. But I realize now I shouldn't have shut you out. Fear gripped me. James, just tell me. What's wrong? He swallowed. I'm sick. Quite sick, actually. The room seemed to tilt. Mom sniffled, dabbing at her eyes, and Dad's grip on her knee tightened. I was diagnosed with stomach cancer. James continued steadily, though his voice was soft. About a month ago. I felt the blood drain from my face. WH what? I stammered. It didn't compute. James was only 39. He was healthy, strong. He was invincible in my eyes. Cancer? No, it had to be a mistake. He must have seen my disbelief. I know. It was a shock to me too. He managed a ghost of a smile. Surgeons like me, we think we're immune to being the patient. But life has a way of humbling you. How bad is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My brother looked down, fiddling with his wedding band. I noticed it hanging looser on his finger than before. It's advanced. Stage 3 when they found it, Possibly stage 4. It spread to some lymph nodes. My mother let out a quiet sob. Dad closed his eyes, pained. I covered my mouth with a trembling hand. Stage 3 or 4. I didn't know all the medical details, but I knew that wasn't good. They want me to start aggressive treatment immediately. Chemotherapy. Maybe surgery if the tumor shrinks. But he hesitated, then looked up, resolute. I've decided not to undergo treatment. What? I blinked, thinking I'd misheard. Dad cleared his throat. We tried to change his mind, Pumpkin. But he's adamant. I swung my gaze back to James. Why? You have to fight it. You can't give up. He reached over and took my hand, his own cool and steady while mine shook. I'm not giving up, he said gently. But I know what the chances are. Even with treatment, the odds. They aren't great, Hannah. And the quality of life during whatever time I have left. I don't want it to be hospitals and debilitating side effects. I've seen too many patients make themselves miserable for a slim chance. I don't want that for me. Or for you all. But there's a chance. I argued, tears spilling now. There's always a chance. You could go into remission. Or some new trial. He squeezed my hand. Maybe. But I've made my peace with it. I'm tired, Hannah. Those last words came out in a fragile whisper, his calm facade cracking just a little. I saw the fear in his eyes then, and the sorrow. I'm so very tired. I broke. Leaning forward, I wrapped my arms around him tightly. He hugged me back with surprising strength, and I felt his heartbeat against mine, a cruel reminder that it was counting down. Please, I cried softly. Please don't do this. Don't shut us out. We can find a way. I can come to Tokyo help you. He shushed me gently, stroking my hair like he did when I was a little girl. I'm not alone, sis. I have great colleagues, good friends. He pulled back to look at me, tears brimming in his own eyes now. I didn't bring you all here just to tell you I'm sick. There's more. I wiped my face, trying to compose myself though I was trembling. More? What more could there be? James sat up straighter, a resolve coming into his face that reminded me of him in the ore, a focused determination. I need to ask a favor. From all of you. My parents listened intently, the way they used to when he'd speak as a precocious child explaining some science fact. James continued, I've thought long and hard about this. The time I have left, I want to spend it meaningfully, without regrets. To that end, I have some plans in motion, particularly regarding my estate and responsibilities. I felt a small jolt, wondering if this was going where I thought. Mom voiced my thought. Your estate, dear, you're going to live for a long time. We'll find a way. Mom, he said firmly, let's just plan for the worst and hope for the best, all right? She nodded, dabbing her eyes again. He looked between the three of us. I have a significant amount in savings and assets from my work as a surgeon. I've never been frugal, he chuckled, and I recalled how he enjoyed first-class trips and expensive dinners when he had time off, ways to blow off steam. But I've saved enough. The thing is, I don't intend for any of it to go to Vanessa. A silence fell. We all understood instantly what he was implying. My father cleared his throat. Son, are you talking about your will? You're disinheriting your wife. James pursed his lips. In so many words, yes. And no. I don't plan to have much left to be inherited by the time I'm gone. I looked at him in surprise. He continued, I've started reallocating my finances. There are a few things I want to do while I'm alive. Gifts I want to give. He turned to me, and his eyes softened. Hannah, I meant what I said on the phone. I've set aside a wedding fund for you. 10 million yen. He smiled sadly. Should make for a hell of a party. My breath caught. 10 million yen. Roughly $90,000. Far more than necessary. James, He held up a hand. Please let me do this. It's already done, actually. The account's made and you're the beneficiary. Mom and Dad have the details to give you later. I couldn't speak, choking up again. My brother, even facing his own mortality, he was thinking of me, of my future happiness. There are also gifts for you both, he said, addressing our parents. I've made arrangements to secure your retirement fully, Dad, so you don't have to worry about a thing. And Mom, I set up a little travel fund for you because I know you've always wanted to see Europe. My mother broke down in tears again, protesting that he didn't need to, that she'd rather have him than any trip. He rubbed her shoulder gently, tears shining in his own eyes. And the rest, he continued, voice growing firmer, the rest of my assets, I intend to donate to the hospital where I work. Specifically to the research department and to some charities for patient care. If I wasn't already crying, I might have gasped. I wasn't surprised, exactly. This was exactly the kind of selfless act James would do, but the magnitude of it and the clear message it sent took my breath away. He was leaving nothing for his wife. Not even an afterthought. Dad let out a low whistle. That's quite something, son. Quite something. James looked down. I know this might seem harsh regarding Vanessa, but she'll be fine. She has her family's money, and truthfully, I can't trust that she would use anything I left in a way that honors my memory. I'd rather it go to saving lives, helping others. That's something I know she never really cared about. There was a bitterness to his tone when he mentioned her that I rarely heard. I realized then that my phone call had likely only confirmed what he already feared, that during his hardest battle, she wasn't truly by his side. Perhaps his illness had opened his eyes to things he hadn't wanted to see before. Or maybe, like he hinted, he'd suspected her infidelity for a while but hadn't wanted to confront it while fighting for his life. So he concluded, "The favor I need is your support in this, legally and emotionally." He gave a weary laugh. "It's a bit unorthodox, I know. But I want to enjoy what time I have left to actually spend my money on good experiences, on people I care for, rather than leave it to someone who sees me as a bank account." He didn't say Vanessa's name, but we all knew. It hung in the air like an unspoken indictment. My father nodded slowly. "You have our support, of course. Whatever you need, James. We'll keep this between us." Mom agreed, though she worried aloud. "What about Vanessa? Does she know anything? Are you going to tell her about the illness?" James was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. "Not the full extent. She knows I've had some stomach issues, but I downplayed it as an ulcer. If she knew I was terminal, I don't know what she'd do." He ran a hand over his face. "Maybe she'd stick around for appearances. Maybe she'd vanish. I honestly don't know. But I don't want the rest of my days tainted by fights or drama. I haven't decided what to do about our marriage yet. Part of me considered separation to make things cleaner legally, but that would be a scandal at work and I don't have the energy." He looked at me, guilt written on his face. "I'm sorry about all the trouble she's caused you. Truly. I know she's been awful." I shook my head, wiping tears. "None of that matters now. I'm here for you. Whatever you need. Always." He smiled gratefully, and we all moved in to hug him. For a while we stayed like that, huddled together, a family united, preparing for a battle we never wanted to face. I realized I had been holding myself tense, waiting for another shoe to drop. But that was it, the terrible news, the shocking plan. It was enough. In the midst of devastation, I also felt a fierce surge of pride. Pride in my brother's bravery and generosity. Even as he faced death, he was thinking of others, planning to secure our futures and give to those in need. In that moment, I silently vowed to support him every step of the way. I'd postpone my wedding if I had to, move to Tokyo to help with his care, fight anyone who dared to challenge his decisions, Vanessa included. Looking at my parents' stricken faces as they clung to their son, I also felt a flare of anger. Anger at life for being so cruel, and anger at her. The woman who should have been here with us, holding James's hand, vowing to stay by him through sickness and health as she promised. But she wasn't here. She was out lunching, shopping, carrying on affairs, oblivious. I didn't voice those thoughts. There would be time enough to deal with her. For now, we focused on James, discussing what few treatment options he hadn't rolled out, trying gently to see if he'd change his mind, he didn't, and planning how to make his remaining time as good as possible. He wanted to keep working as long as he could, to keep life normal. We reluctantly agreed not to coddle him too much, to respect his wishes, though privately I hoped he'd slow down and treasure whatever time he had left outside the hospital. Before I left that day, James pulled me aside and handed me a thick envelope. Inside was documentation for the wedding fund account he'd set up, a letter of his wishes, and another sealed envelope labeled for Vanessa, if necessary. I frowned. "What's this?" He sighed. "I wrote her a letter, explaining my decisions. I'll only have you give it to her if she causes trouble, or after I'm gone. Whichever comes first." He shook his head. "Maybe it's cowardly of me not to just speak to her now. But you understand why, right?" I did. He didn't want to spend his last days in endless fights or manipulations. Nodding, I tucked the envelope away carefully. "I hope I won't have to use it," I said. "Me too," he said softly. As I hugged him goodbye, I tried to ignore how frail he felt. He was still my tall, strong brother, but I could sense the fragility lurking under the surface. When he drove off, I stood with Mom and Dad on the porch, watching his car disappear down the road. Mom broke into quiet sobs again, and Dad put an arm around us both, his own eyes wet. We would be okay, I told myself. We had to be, for James. The next few months passed in a blur of worry, hope, and moments of heartbreaking clarity. True to his word, James continued working as much as he could. He scheduled treatments not to cure, since he refused chemo, but to manage pain and symptoms. I suspected he was taking some medications quietly, maybe experimental ones or palliative measures to keep him functional. He didn't share details, and I didn't push, respecting his desire for normalcy. I visited him in Tokyo as often as I could manage, juggling the store and wedding planning, which now felt absurd to even think about. In fact, Ethan and I quietly agreed to put the wedding on hold until further notice. How could I celebrate while my brother was dying? Ethan's love and understanding during this time only cemented my certainty that he was the right partner for me. He became my rock, accompanying me on some hospital visits, comforting me on the nights I felt despair creeping in. My in-laws-to-be sent their prayers and told me not to worry about any postponements. They wanted us to focus on family first. Each time I saw James, the changes were slight but undeniable. A little thinner, a little more tired. Yet his spirit stayed surprisingly high, bolstered by an outpouring of support from colleagues and patients who didn't even know he was ill. To them, he just looked overworked, which wasn't unusual. He was a beloved figure at the hospital, and I observed how the nurses doted on him, how the junior doctors sought his advice. He was leaving a legacy there beyond any donation. As for Vanessa, she remained an enigma, at least to me. I barely spoke to her after that phone call and the store incident. She didn't reach out to me either, which was a blessing. I gleaned bits and pieces about her from my parents. Apparently, she remained mostly in Tokyo, continuing her socialite life. James eventually told her that he was going to give a significant donation to the hospital. He framed it as a charitable choice he wanted to make while alive. She apparently didn't object. In fact, he confided to me with a sad smile that she seemed relieved when he told her he'd given away a portion of their savings. Likely because she interpreted it as less pressure on her to play the doting wife for appearance's sake. Now if he died, she'd have an excuse to tell her circle that he gave so much away. The sheer coldness of that realization made me physically ill, but I held my tongue. James made me promise, as the leaves began to turn gold in early autumn, not to confront her. After I'm gone, he said quietly, she'll get what's coming. Let karma or whatever do its job, Hannah. Don't weigh yourself down with bitterness. I promised, though it was one of the hardest promises I've made. Yet I couldn't help observing things. On one visit to their apartment, I noticed shopping bags from high-end boutiques littered about, and evidence she was still dining out frequently. Meanwhile, the house was maintained by a hired cleaner. Vanessa herself was often out with friends or at the spa while I was there caring for James' post a draining hospital appointment. To her slight credit, she did show up at the hospital the day of an important scan, but I suspect it was just to play the concerned wife in front of the staff. She lasted maybe an hour sitting by his side, then left claiming a headache. James didn't seem surprised. One afternoon, as I sat with him in his office after he'd wrapped up an early shift, his boss had finally forced him to go part-time, he asked me softly, "Did you ever see that man with her again?" "Roger." I shook my head. "No. But I haven't exactly been looking." "And I stayed quiet like you asked. I didn't tell Mom and Dad or anyone else." He nodded, gazing out the window of his office at the skyline. "I appreciate that. Honestly, I don't even care anymore what she does. It's strange, when you realize your time is limited, certain things just cease to matter." He turned to me, eyes clear. "I'm not even angry at her. I'm just disappointed. In myself, mostly for picking the wrong partner." "Don't say that," I whispered. "You loved her. You tried." "Yes, I did," he said softly. "But love can't fix fundamental incompatibility, can it? We wanted different things in life." I blinded myself to some of it because, well, I was nearly 35 and lonely when I met her, and she was breathtaking. It's a poor excuse, but I fell for the image and ignored the substance. A wry smile. Lesson learned, I suppose. A bit too late. I had nothing to say to that. I just squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. "Enough about that. Tell me something good. How's the store? How's Ethan?" I obliged, telling him about a funny customer incident and about how Ethan had attempted to cook me a surprise dinner and nearly burned down his kitchen. We laughed together, momentarily just siblings again, not patient and caretaker. But those moments were getting rarer. As we edged into October, James's condition deteriorated quickly. The doctors had initially estimated 6 months, but barely 3 months from his diagnosis, he was in and out of the hospital with complications. He had as much as he could from us, but by early November, he was bedridden more often than not. We moved him from the apartment to the hospital's private ward when things took a turn. To give credit where it's due, Vanessa did step up in one regard, the appearances. She made sure the hospital staff saw her at his side occasionally, though the nurses confided to me that she rarely stayed longer than a short visit and often was on her phone the whole time. His colleagues, on the other hand, were there in earnest. The outpouring of real love floored me. Senior doctors, junior interns, nurses, techs. People dropped in not just to check on a coworker, but on a dear friend. They brought him things. One nurse baked his favorite bread pudding. Another doctor sneaked in vintage wine, which he couldn't really drink due to his condition, but it was the thought. They told stories to cheer him up. They rallied around him as we, his family, did. They became part of our family in that wing, in those final days. Vanessa, perhaps uncomfortable around so many people who saw how truly beloved James was beyond his wealth, retreated more and more. The last time I saw her in the hospital was 2 days before James passed. He was asleep, frail and sunken in the bed, a morphine drip easing his pain. She stood in the corner of the room, arms folded, looking at him with a conflicted expression I couldn't decipher. Regret? Annoyance? Grief? Maybe a mix of all. We exchanged no words, just nods. After a few minutes, she slipped out with barely a goodbye. I stayed by his side through that last night, along with a rotation of his closest friends from the ward. In the early hours of a chilly November morning, my brother took his final breath with my hand in his, my mother praying softly on the other side of the bed, and 3 nurses who adored him standing vigil, tears in their eyes. He was gone. Before 40, just like he'd feared, like we all dreaded yet knew was coming too fast. The grief that enveloped us was immense. At his funeral a week later, the winter skies were ashen, as if the world itself mourned. We held the service in our hometown to lay him to rest near where we grew up, and dozens upon dozens of people showed up. Friends, family, colleagues. So many colleagues traveled from Tokyo to pay respects, even a few patients and their families who heard the news and came to honor the doctor who had saved or cared for their loved ones. I moved through that day in a daze of sorrow, until the moment I spotted Vanessa, and the anger reared its head. Yes, we've come full circle, back to that fateful confrontation in the funeral hall. The events of that confrontation swirl vividly in my mind, even now. I remember stepping outside after nearly slapping her, shaking with a combination of fury and remorse. But I didn't stay out there for very long. After a few minutes in the cold air, I forced myself to return inside. My brother deserved a dignified service, and I wouldn't let her deprive me of attending the rest of it. By the time I re-entered, a eulogy by one of James's closest friends, the head of surgery at his hospital, was concluding. I slipped into a back pew and tried to compose myself, wiping my face and smoothing my dress. As the ceremony ended and people began milling quietly, some lining up to offer condolences to my parents, others breaking off into small groups sharing memories, I steeled myself and approached my family. Vanessa was standing off to the side near a cluster of chairs, dabbing her eyes now as if she'd been crying. Perhaps she managed a few tears when people were watching. I doubted her sudden display of emotion's authenticity. I saw her glance toward my parents, but she didn't move to speak with them or to receive people. Instead, I overheard her voice, low and irritated, speaking to the man at her elbow. Her father, I realized. A stone-faced older gentleman who had flown in for the funeral. It should be happening now, right? The will reading or whatever, she was whispering harshly. Not immediately, he muttered back, looking a bit uncomfortable. These things take time. I guess they assumed a formal will reading would happen at the funeral like in some movie. In reality, those matters are handled privately later, especially if there's little to discuss. But she clearly expected some immediate resolution. Of course she did. My father, noticing the two of them, approached with a stony expression. He stepped up beside me and cleared his throat. Vanessa. She turned, schooling her features into a somber mask. Yes, Dad, I mean Mr. Thompson, she said, catching herself from the familial term since it was clear relations were strained. My father's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. We'll be having a small family gathering at our home after this, to share memories of James. His eyes flicked over to the older man, giving a polite nod of acknowledgement but not exactly extending an invitation. Vanessa's father shifted awkwardly. That's understandable. I actually have a flight to catch this evening. He squeezed his daughter's arm. My condolences again, Vanessa dear. I'll call you when I land. It seemed he wanted no part in whatever tension was brewing. Vanessa gave him a quick peck on the cheek and he left in a hurry. She then turned back to my father. I suppose I should attend as his widow, she said with a forced meekness. That's up to you, Dad replied tersely. Then he looked at me, concern softening his face. Everything all right, Pumpkin? I managed a nod, though my eyes flickered to the necklace on Vanessa's neck. I still hadn't had my satisfaction regarding that. But there would be time. Dad headed off to speak to the funeral director about concluding details, leaving me once again with Vanessa. Only this time I wasn't alone. Several of James's co-workers, Nurse Ken among them, as well as 2 doctors, were nearby, seemingly hovering protectively. They must have sensed trouble. One of the doctors, a kind woman named Dr. Sato, approached and gently touched my arm. Hannah, was it? She said kindly. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your brother was a great man. Thank you, I managed, giving a small bow of gratitude. Vanessa, likely feeling left out of this sympathetic exchange, piped up, yes, thank you all for coming. It's been so hard, she feigned a dab at her eyes again. Ken, who stood on my other side, had his lips pressed in a thin line. His earlier calm was fraying too. He and many of the staff knew the truth of how absent she'd been during James's illness. Still, out of respect, they had refrained from confronting her. But I sensed their patience, like mine, was wearing thin. As people started to file out, leaving just family and close friends, I saw my father return to us. He was holding a slim folder, likely containing the will and estate documents James had prepared. The plan was to discuss those privately later with a lawyer friend, but I suspect Dad brought it along in case any urgent issue arose. Vanessa's eyes zeroed in on that folder like a hawk, and that's when she lost any self-restraint she'd been clinging to. All right, she declared, stepping forward. I think it's time we discuss the inheritance. A hush fell among those remaining. I saw my mother flinch at the bluntness of it. I stepped closer to Mom instinctively, as if shielding her from the ugliness. My father raised an eyebrow. This is neither the time nor the place, Vanessa, he said sternly. We can speak later. She shook her head, her composure unraveling. Why not now? Everyone's here. Let's get it over with. James would have wanted things transparent, wouldn't he? I almost laughed at that idea. Transparent? She was the one in for the shock of her life, not us. But her rising agitation had caught the attention of the remaining crowd. They were mostly James's work family, and from the glances they exchanged, they smelled blood in the water. Ken coughed into his hand, failing to hide a smirk. Another nurse beside him outright giggled before turning it into a fake cough to cover herself. The tension in the room shifted from somber grief to something more charged, more expectant. Vanessa noticed. What's so funny, she snapped, glaring at the young nurse who'd giggled. Have some respect. That nurse, a young woman with big, sad eyes, glared right back, tears on her cheeks. I think, she said tremulously, you're the one who should show respect, ma'am. I was momentarily stunned at her boldness. Vanessa looked ready to lunge. Excuse me. My father intervened with a raised hand. Enough. He looked at the gathered colleagues. I appreciate you all being here. Perhaps we should reconvene at our home if you'd like to join, but maybe give us a moment alone as family. No, Vanessa interjected, voice shrill. They can stay. In fact, let everyone hear. I don't care if the whole world hears. I deserve what's mine. I am his wife. Her voice echoed in the now mostly empty hall, each word dripping with indignation and fear. A low ooh of incredulity rippled through the small audience, as if they were watching drama unfold on stage. Ken actually chuckled darkly under his breath, arms folded as he watched. My mother was dabbing her eyes, her face crumpled in distress, and my father's fists were clenched at his sides. I felt Ken's steadying presence near my shoulder again, but I didn't need restraint this time, only the strength to speak the truth. I stepped forward, facing her fully. What exactly do you think is yours, Vanessa? I asked, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. She scoffed, crossing her arms. Don't play dumb. James's estate, of course. His money, his assets, our home, his life insurance, everything. By law, as his spouse, I'm entitled to at least half. The colleagues around exchanged looks of disbelief and suppressed anger. Some shook their heads or murmured among themselves. My heart was pounding, but not with fear, with anticipation. This was it, the moment the trap James had laid with his generosity would spring, and I almost felt a grim satisfaction knowing I'd be the one to trigger it. My father looked at me, silently asking if I wanted to handle it. I nodded almost imperceptibly. I took a deep breath and fixed Vanessa with the steadiest gaze I could muster. If you truly cared about what you were entitled to, perhaps you should have cared more about the man himself while he was alive. She reared back as if slapped. How dare you? How dare I? My voice rose, echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. All the grief, anger, and frustration of the past months surged forth. You have some nerve talking about entitlement at his funeral, as if he were some bank account that finally matured. He was my brother, their son, your husband, though you hardly acted like a loving wife. Her face flushed a deep red. Watch your mouth. I loved him in my own way. Don't you judge me just because I showed it differently. This is the real world, sweetie. Love doesn't pay the bills. Not that I'd expect you to understand with your fairy tale engagement. She spat the words with venom. A collective gasp came from our rapt audience, many of whom were now openly glaring at her. Ken let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. I felt something uncoil inside me, a fierce, clear sense of purpose. I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving hers. You're right, I said coldly. I don't understand. I don't understand how someone could prioritize branded bags and high teas over a dying husband. How you could be out with other men while James was working himself to the bone. How you could stand here, wearing that. I jabbed a finger toward the diamond necklace glinting at her throat, that gaudy thing that he didn't even buy you, and dare to speak of what you're owed. She reflexively covered the necklace with her hand, eyes widening. For the first time, I saw true panic there. You're crazy. This is slander. Oh, save it, I snarled. I saw you. I saw you with your little boyfriend, buying that necklace in my store. I'm sure everyone here would love to know just how faithful the grieving widow was to their dear friend James. A few scattered, oh my goddess, and whispers of shock came from the colleagues. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Why, you have no proof, she hissed, but her voice faltered. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Proof? Did you really think James didn't catch on? He knew Vanessa. Maybe not the details, but he knew what kind of person you were. Why do you think he kept you in the dark about everything that really mattered at the end? Her eyes darted around, as if looking for an ally, but found none. She suddenly seemed to notice that nearly all the remaining people were glaring at her, not me. The tide had turned decisively. She switched tactics, attempting to muster tears and a pitiful expression. We had our problems, like any marriage. But I was there for him in my own way. And he promised to take care of me. He wanted me to be provided for. Do you truly not know? My father cut in, his voice quiet but carrying. He gave her a look almost of pity. He did take care of you. In his mind, he did what was best. Vanessa looked between us, still not comprehending. What are you saying? I exchanged a glance with Dad. He gave a slight nod, his face grim. This was it. I squared my shoulders and spoke clearly, every word like a nail in the coffin of her expectations. There is no windfall coming to you, Vanessa. James made sure of that. She stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. Excuse me. My lips twitched in a mirthless smile. He liquidated most of his assets, spent what he had on things he cared about, and donated the rest. As far as money goes, by the time he passed, there's basically nothing left in his name. That's a lie, she shrieked, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. It's the truth, I said. My father quietly opened the folder in his hands and produced a single sheet of paper, the summary statement from James's accounts. I took it and held it out for her. See for yourself. Nearly zero balances across the board. She snatched the paper from my hand and skimmed it frantically, her eyes widening as she scanned the figures. This doesn't include everything. What about the apartment? The car? The apartment is mortgaged, my father interjected. And the car was leased. He returned it before. Dad had to pause, the grief catching up to him. Before the end. Vanessa shook her head violently, the paper rattling in her grasp. No, he wouldn't do that. He promised me a comfortable life. Her voice cracked. He wouldn't leave me with nothing. I felt a twinge of something, maybe pity, as I watched her world crumble. But it was drowned out by a stern resolve. He didn't leave you with nothing, I said quietly. You have the house along with its mortgage. And whatever jewelry and luxury trinkets you collected. You can sell them if you need money. I'm sure that necklace alone could float you for a while. Her face blanched, realization slowly dawning that this was very real. She turned wild, pleading eyes to my father, then to my mother, as if expecting them to contradict me. They didn't. Instead, a new voice spoke up, Dr. Sato, James's colleague. She stepped forward, her expression one of gentle firmness. James's final act was one of incredible generosity, she said. He left a sizable donation to our hospital's research wing. It's going to save countless lives in the future. That was his legacy, Mrs. Thompson, not a bank account for you. A few other colleagues murmured in agreement. One added heatedly, he was throwing parties for us even when he was ill. We tried to dissuade him, but he said it brought him joy to see everyone happy. He lived fully until the end, and shared what he had with those who cared about him. Vanessa looked as if she might faint. Then, in the next breath, she exploded, You conspired with him. She jabbed a finger at me and my parents, her hand shaking. All of you. To cheat me out of what's mine. This is illegal. It's theft. Where's the lawyer? I'll contest this. I'll sue the hospital. That money was half mine by law. She was hysterical now, her voice echoing in the near-empty hall. People were drawing closer not out of sympathy, but out of fascination and indignation. Nurse Ken let out another short laugh that cut through her rant. Sue the hospital? On what grounds? Your husband voluntarily chose to donate his estate. You can't sue away a gift he gave while alive. And you'd be surprised, chimed in an older doctor icily, how airtight the legal documents he signed are. He had a good head for these things. You won't see a yen of it. I watched as Vanessa's fury turned to desperation. She looked at me, and for one moment, I saw something like genuine despair in her tear-streaked face. Hannah, please, she said hoarsely. I'm his wife. I was supposed to build a life with him. I gave up my career for him. I held up a hand, unmoved. Don't try to spin this. You didn't give up anything for him. You loved his lifestyle, not him. And in the end, he saw through it. Her face crumpled. She finally began to cry in earnest. Ragged, ugly sobs. Whether it was from true grief or sheer terror of her new reality, I couldn't tell. Perhaps a bit of both. She reached out a hand toward me, shaking, mascara running. Hannah, I know I was difficult, but please, help me. I don't know what to do. For a heartbeat, I remembered the vibrant, dazzling woman she was when we first met, how I had hoped to have a sister in her. How different things could have been if her heart had been as beautiful as her face. And I pitied her then, because she had lost far more than money. She had lost a good man's love and the trust of everyone around her. I'm sorry, I said softly, and I realized I meant it in a way. But I can't help you. Not after everything. She looked utterly lost, swaying on her feet. Her gaze roamed the room at all the unsympathetic faces encircling her. Finally, realizing no savior was coming, she let out a wordless cry of frustration and despair, then shoved the paper back at me and bolted down the aisle. The double doors creaked as she pushed through them and disappeared, her sobs echoing briefly before silence settled. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. There was a long pause, as if everyone were processing what had just happened. Then, as if releasing a collective tension, a few of the nurses burst into nervous laughter. The doctors shook their heads, some with smiles of vindication. I even saw a few discreet high-fives exchanged. It was as if they couldn't contain the dark catharsis of seeing poetic justice served. My father sighed deeply and wrapped an arm around my mother, who was trembling with a mixture of relief and sadness. I sagged against the back of a pew, suddenly exhausted. Ken approached and patted my shoulder kindly. You did well, he whispered. Better than I would have. I might have thrown a punch. I managed a weak chuckle. Thank you for stepping in earlier and for having his back and mine. He nodded. Your brother was a great man. We all will miss him terribly. None of us wanted to see his memory tarnished by that. Dr. Sato also gave me a gentle hug. If you ever need anything at all, please reach out. James did so much for us. We'd like to be there for his family too. I thanked them both, deeply moved. In the commotion and my own hurt, I hadn't fully appreciated until now just how deeply my brother had touched these people's lives. Here they were, practically strangers to me a year ago, standing by me at my worst moment, championing James's wishes as fervently as I was. It filled me with both pride and an aching sadness for his absence. As people trickled away, offering final condolences, one of the hospital administrators approached to express gratitude for James's donation, assuring us that his name would be honored on a plaque in the research wing. It was all a bit much, but I accepted the thanks on his behalf. In the ensuing days, news of Vanessa's spectacular downfall spread in certain circles. The jewelry industry grapevine, which I was connected to, buzzed with talk that she was trying to sell off her designer handbags, watches, and even some jewelry for quick cash. The fancy apartment would likely be foreclosed if she didn't manage to assume its payments or sell it. By the end of the year, I heard she had quietly moved out, presumably to a more modest place or perhaps back to her parents' home in Shane. That young man I'd seen her with? Rumor had it he vanished from her life the moment the money did. When she did finally call me those months later, it was a short and perfunctory conversation. She begged for help. She even said she'd accept a loan to get back on her feet. Perhaps pride kept her from asking her own family, or maybe they refused after seeing her true colors. I told her calmly that our ties were dissolved with James's passing, and gave her pragmatic advice, to consult a lawyer about formally renouncing the inheritance, thus escaping the debts, if she was within the legal time frame, and to liquidate what luxury items she could to pay off any remaining liabilities. She cried and even apologized between sobs for everything she'd done to our family. Perhaps she truly was sorry by then, having faced the consequences of her actions. But it was far too late. I quietly wished her well, honestly, because I had no desire to see her suffer endlessly. I just needed her out of our lives. Then I ended the call. That was the last time I ever heard her voice. Life moved forward as it tends to do. After we buried James, I sank into a deep grief that lingered for a long time. My wedding was postponed by a year. I simply couldn't imagine a celebration without my brother there to tease me about tripping in my white dress or to offer a silly toast. Ethan and his parents understood completely. They offered me nothing but patience and love as I navigated the loss. During those months, I focused on keeping my brother's memory alive in meaningful ways. I volunteered on weekends at the hospital where he'd worked, bringing in homemade cookies for the staff in the ward that cared for him. It felt healing to chat with the nurses and doctors who had become our friends, sharing stories about James. I even joined a committee for the annual hospital gala, helping to organize a charity auction in his honor. It was successful, enough to fund a small research grant in his name. My depression lingered, but I refused to let it consume me. I kept reminding myself that James wouldn't want me to wither away in sadness. So I took small steps. I met up with friends for coffee even when I didn't feel like it. I took long walks in the park, recalling how James used to jog there in the mornings. I found that helping others eased my own pain. I began volunteering a couple evenings a month at a local hospice, simply sitting with patients, listening to them, sometimes holding their hand if they had no one else. I knew James had done the same for many of his patients. In doing these things, I felt connected to him, and my heart slowly began to heal. Eventually, with spring came a sense of renewal. I realized that postponing joy indefinitely would be the last thing James wanted for me. He had given me the means to have a beautiful wedding, and I knew I should honor that gift when I was ready. So, with a mix of sorrow and hope, I resumed planning, quietly weaving in touches that honored his memory. I had the seamstress sew a small piece of one of James's old ties into the lining of my wedding dress, a little secret that made me feel he was close. We decided on a lovely date in early summer, at a chapel not far from where we grew up. The day I walked down the aisle, the sun was shining bright and warm. I wore the pearl necklace James had given me, resting just above my heart. My father held my arm on one side, and in my other hand I clutched a bouquet of white lilies, James's favorite flower, intertwined with blue delphiniums to match the tie scrap hidden in my dress. We left an empty chair in the front row, with a framed photo of James placed on it and a single lily laid across the seat. It felt like he was there with us, smiling that big brother smile of pride. Perhaps the most touching surprise was the presence of his colleagues at our wedding. Unbeknownst to me, a large group of the hospital staff had coordinated something special. Many of them couldn't attend the ceremony due to distance or duties, so instead, early that morning, they gathered at James's grave. They laid a wreath and paid their respects on our behalf, knowing it was a big day for me that he would have loved to witness. Then, at the reception that evening, I was stunned to see a delegation of about a dozen people, doctors, nurses, even the hospital administrator, arrive together. They had driven hours to be there. Dr. Sato and Nurse Ken were among them. When I saw them, I burst into tears and embraced them each tightly. They came bearing a gift, a scrapbook they'd compiled filled with handwritten notes from dozens of hospital staff and even patients' families. Each note shared a story or memory of how James had touched their lives, acts of kindness I'd never even known about, praise for his skill and compassion, thanks for making them laugh during tough shifts, anecdotes of his generosity. It was, in a way, the completion of James's legacy, handed to me in a beautifully bound book. Ethan welcomed them and made sure they had seats and refreshments. Later in the evening, during toasts, Dr. Sato took the microphone and spoke a few words about James. How he once held a ridiculous costume contest at the hospital just to cheer everyone up. How he'd quietly paid the hospital bills for a patient who couldn't afford it. How he was so proud of me and looked forward to my wedding. It made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure, and it felt like, for a moment, James was alive in that room, in the stories and laughter. Meanwhile, news of Vanessa faded into obscurity. I heard she sold the mansion and most of her possessions. Someone mentioned she'd been seen working at a luxury car dealership in another city, a job that leveraged her looks and charm, perhaps all she felt she had left to offer. Another rumor said she tried reviving her modeling career overseas, without much success. Whatever the truth, I didn't really care. I harbored no desire for further revenge or spite. Life had dealt her a fair hand of consequences, and I had my own life to live. Standing there at my wedding reception, surrounded by love, Ethan by my side, my parents smiling, my in-laws laughing with my family, my best friends and James's friends sharing stories, I realized something profound. In losing James, I had gained a mission, to live in a way that honored him. To love deeply, give freely, and stand up for what's right, just as he did. I excused myself for a moment and stepped out onto the venue's little terrace. The night air was cool and still. Above, the stars were just beginning to peek out. I looked up at the sky, searching for one bright star to focus on. "I miss you," I whispered, feeling the tears come. "Thank you for everything, James. I hope you're at peace. I hope you know I'm going to be okay, and that I'll never stop trying to make you proud." A gentle breeze picked up, lifting a strand of hair from my face. It felt like a soft acknowledgement, imagined or not. I chose to believe it was him. Losing my brother so young taught me so much about the fragility of life, the importance of love, and the corrosiveness of greed. I learned that marrying for money, as Vanessa did, was a fool's bargain, because wealth is hollow comfort in a loveless life. I learned that true family are those who stand by you in the darkest times, whether bound by blood or by shared experience. And I learned that even when you think you've lost everything, you can find the strength to stand back up, especially with a guardian angel's memory urging you on. My brother's legacy isn't in the money he spent or donated. It lives on in the ripples of kindness he left behind. It lives in that hospital wing where research will save lives, in the colleagues he inspired to work harder and care deeper, in the way I treat others with empathy, and in the love I pour into my own marriage. In the end, greed destroyed one life, Vanessa's, but it couldn't destroy James's goodness. As I turned to rejoin the party, my new husband waiting with open arms, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Yes, the past year had been filled with sorrow, anger, and hard-earned wisdom. But here I was, stepping forward into a future built on love, gratitude, and integrity, the very things James taught me by example. Greed had reared its ugly head in my family, but love had beaten it back. And in that triumph, I found solace. I found closure. I found the strength to truly live again. Love had the final word after all.